Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me on my next episode of Creative Real Estate Ownership. Today's episode is one I'm really excited about. It's called A Therapist's Take on 5 Big Questions That a Couple Should Be Thinking About Around Buying a Home Together. So this kind of falls into the category of co-ownership and the benefits of co-ownership and all the things that come with that, buying real estate together and how you have more power buying with other people. And so this is a focus on what happens for couples. And that therapist is a old friend of mine from Berkeley named Jason Brand. And Jason has been a therapist for over 15 years, and he specializes in couples counseling. He is certified in PACT, which is a certain type of therapy for couples and stands for Psychobiological Approach to Couples Therapy. So Jason and I have known each other since we were essentially babies, and we've been really good friends our whole lives, and so we've been talking about everything under the sun. So I was just really excited to talk to him about this topic and share my experience as it relates to working with couples with his perspective. And the funny thing about being a real estate agent is sometimes we like to consider ourselves therapists, right? We meet folks, we meet couples and we kind of help them navigate difficult situations, which is what a therapist does. We are not therapists. Jason is a therapist. He's the professional. And so, although we have some ways in which we kind of help people manage these processes, he's taking it he has a deeper perspective on what's really going on when two people are kind of embarking on home ownership. And so we had a great conversation. So Jason and I discussed 5 different questions that came up. And so the first question is, what does this big step of buying a home together mean in terms of the evolution of the relationship? And what questions should they be asking themselves as they move towards that goal, right? So it's kind of like pre-purchase counseling kind of a question, right? And we explore that topic. The next, number 2, question is, how do two people's potentially different relationships to money affect the process of buying a home together? So everybody has their own relationship to money. And so sometimes there can be a clash, sometimes it can be very simple, but money is a really big deal in terms of co-ownership and especially with a couple, right? Number 3, how might a couple's background differences affect their home buying process, right? So people come from different cultures, different regions, they're different ages, there are all kinds of various differences, and so different home lives that they've come out of, and so how does that affect the process, right? And the big issues come up around that. Number 4, how might a couple's different taste and sense of style come up? And how do you navigate those differences, right? So different people have different ideas about how they want things to look and feel. It's not as, this is kind of a more fun topic in a way, but there's differences, right? And so how do you kind of work with those things? Last question we explored, how should couples prepare for and think about the big pressure moments that inevitably arise in the home buying process? There's a lot of different points that you have to make a really big decision that, spending the most money that you've ever spent in your life, and how do you deal with and, work together when those big pressure moments arise. And so that was a fun one we explored. So I hope you enjoy this episode. Please remember to like and subscribe, and remember to buy, build, and manage with love, and the rest will work out. Jason, thanks for joining me today.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
We've been talking for over 40 years.
A lifetime, yeah.
About various situations and careers and feelings and relationships, and I wanted to speak with you today in particular, thinking about it from the perspective of that timeline prior to purchase, and in many ways that's such a crucial time. Buying a home together is such a huge step.
Yeah.
Right. And so let's say a couple's been together for a number of years. They may be married, they may not be. They decide they want to buy a house together.
Okay.
Right. What comes to mind for you when thinking about what is that step that they're taking together? And
subtext for this. This is all intended to kind of help, real estate agents, people in my community, understand couples a little better too,
Okay.
so that
Got
they
it.
can service them a little better. I mean,
Yeah.
that's part of the goal today. Super interested in this, but it's also kind of supposed to be somewhat instructive. So thinking about it in that context of like, what is coming up for them? What are they saying to the world?
I mean, I would break this down in two ways. One would be the metaphorical home, the symbolic home, that when people decide, you know what, we are going to make this huge investment. I mean, especially in the Bay Area, this is a huge investment together. We're going to get into this together. There's a symbolic aspect, or, we might even say a kind of more spiritual aspect to it. And then there's a more contractual aspect to it. And so I want to break it down into those two ideas.
Yeah.
The in more of the symbolic, metaphorical aspect, what you're talking about is a home as a place where you come home to. You come home to, and hopefully, we would all hope for ourselves and for the other people in the world that they'd be able to come home to a place that's safe, that's secure, that you feel good about yourself. When you come home, it feels like it's a burden is lifted off of your shoulders.
Yeah.
It's a place to recharge. It's a place to collect yourself, but it's also a place to explore from, right? So, we talk as therapists, we think about a secure base, a place from which we can come, recharge, and then go back out into the world.
Yeah.
And this going back out into the world is a very, very important thing that we have to do, which is that we have to have the resources and able to do it. In order to do it, we have to be able to go out and kind of, be ourselves in the world. And then we also have to know that we have a place to come back to.
Yeah.
So the metaphorical is a home to come back to.
Yeah.
An internal home to come back to.
Yeah.
The contractual is there's obviously overlap here, but it's an agreement. We agree that we are going to make this huge purchase together. And in making this huge purchase together, you hope that people ahead of time, and this is why this is such a crucial question about at the beginning, you would hope that you would have these big questions answered at this point, right?
Yeah.
Now, life often doesn't work that way, but I recognize that. But to the extent that I can say to people in my office or in the world, the more you've gotten through the kind of the nitty-gritty hard questions ahead of time and work this out contractually, because what is at the heart of a contract is that a negotiation and recognizing that you don't get everything that you want.
Yeah.
And that you have to, the things that overlap, fantastic. But there are a lot of areas where you're going to have to compromise.
Yeah.
And in order to compromise, you're going to have to know the playing field. You're going to have to know, and we're going to get into this, money, mess, how do you, what kind of house do you like to keep? What kind of money you got in your pocket? What kind of money do your parents have? Kids, how many kids you want?
Yeah.
Do you want to live in the city or do you want to live, and within this, there are deal breakers.
Right.
I want a house full of kids.
Right.
I don't want to have any kids. Well, this is something contractually ahead of time that couples really should have figured out. And oftentimes that's why they wind up in my office, is because they didn't really have these conversations ahead of time.
Right. I was just thinking it's almost, I was thinking about like premarital counseling.
Mm-hmm.
It's similar in a sense, like home ownership counseling is almost similar in a weird way.
Right.
Because it's making you think about commitment and sharing in a whole new way. Yeah. I mean, I have situations where, I'll be with a client and they're cruising along, everything's fine, and then one person says something and another person says another thing, and they're in direct conflict, and you're like, oh,
right,
we haven't talked about this yet.
Yeah. And that's a good note to the realtors, is, one thing that as a couples therapist that I think a lot about is what's the optimal amount of pressure to put on the couple. The reason that people don't talk about things is not because, they just want to live in the sky, pie in the sky,
Right.
It's because in a lot of ways they're not put under the pressure to have the conversation.
Right.
And they don't have the context and the conditions to have the conversation.
Right.
So when they walk into your office, chances are that this is the first time that they've been put under pressure to really have these kind of conversations.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and you can't really, yes, premarital counseling would be great, especially premarital financial counseling.
Yeah.
Would be fantastic for for this world,
everybody.
for everybody in this
Right.
country, you know, that you shouldn't be able to graduate high school without it, honestly. But
Yeah.
but in terms of money, and you know, the money's a big ticket item. In terms of it's a really big thing that should be talked about, and I would say for the couples, you know, there are some things about, you know, just where does your partner come from? Where do you come from? You know, what do you notice about your backgrounds? You know, it's very rare that people come from the exact same financial background.
Right.
And you know, if you're, you know, now we start to get into kind of in-laws and our immediate or our extended families,
Right.
and families have very different attitudes about how money is shared.
Sure.
You know, you might come from a family where the person who has the father of, you know, your father-in-law might have the idea that, you know, he wants to retire with all his money. You know, he doesn't want to share it.
Yeah.
Your family might say, you know, it's the most important thing in the world that we share a down payment.
Sure.
And I mean, you know this. You could probably speak to this better than I can in terms of these kind of mismatches that come up when people start talking about money. But the thing is in terms of this is the opportunity. I think that's what I would say mainly here with money, is that money's going to be something that you're going to have to talk about your whole life.
Yeah.
Nobody likes to talk about money.
Right.
Nobody likes to keep a budget. Nobody likes to look at the reality
Right.
of what they can afford, especially in a market like this. And yes, these conversations are going to be hard. No, these conversations don't happen easily or quickly. You have to be able to kind of sit through them. And knowing is always better than not knowing. You know, it's the reality is our safest place to be in the end, even though it might feel scary. And money is finding out the reality of the money situation when buying a home is 100% crucial, because you can't do it without it.
It's also an opportunity to learn something interesting about your mate too, because, you know, my wife and I, we have kind of a different relationship with money. Like,
Sure.
We just do. Like, she was raised, not even how she was raised. It's just we're different people. We think about it different. It brings up different anxieties,
Right.
Or brings up more anxiety for me than her.
Uh-huh.
And it's been a process of really illuminating something core about her that has been revelatory for me, and it's been interesting for me to find, you know, a different kind of take on money.
Yeah.
And so I think there is a part, you know, thinking about opening the books to each other, right?
Right.
Which
It's nice.
for years couples could be dating and have no idea how much money the other person has. Or,
Right.
So there's a vulnerability attached to it.
Right.
But there's really an exposure. But I think you're right. I mean, it's just like you got to open the books.
You got to open the books.
Got to open the books.
Yeah. And money's particularly challenging because, you know, with a lot of things like, you know, how many kids do you want to have? Like, I don't know. It's not, with money, it's just, there's more of a concrete element to it. You either have it or you don't, you know? And so and the main thing, I mean, I like what you're saying about, you know, remaining curious, you know, having an attitude that this is an opportunity to learn about your partner and all these things. What kills those kind of conversations is, okay, but what's the bottom line? And with money, there is a bottom line. So it makes it very, very complicated when there is a bottom line and there's only so much. I do believe, though, with money that, you know, that people end up with something that fits for them, that fits for both of them. It's a funny thing that I notice with my clients or couples that end up buying houses is, you know, one person might want this, one person might want that, but they end up finding something once they work it through the process that kind of fits, kind of
Right.
makes sense for both of them.
Right. Yeah, and that's part of the process. But yeah, it's certainly not putting your head in the sand.
Right.
Is just not a good. And you know, when I see a difference, I do try to pull it out a little bit, because I'm like, hey, you know, it's just like in your job, when you see the kind of red flag go up, you're like, okay, that's an area I need to focus on. It is similar in the sense of like, okay, we need to get a little bit more on the same page, and sometimes it's just different.
Yeah.
Each person has a very different take, and they're really trying to come together from kind of a far position. Like, some spending means losing security, and another person is like, spending means growth and and joy
Right.
You know, more transparency is kind of
Mm-hmm.
you know the big takeaway. I going into what's also and you touched on it with the in-laws, when you have, you know, maybe one person's family has very little money
Mm-hmm.
but is willing to give you quite a bit of money of whatever
Right,
they
right,
have
right,
for a
right.
down payment, and then the other family has a lot of money
Right.
and is only willing to give you very little money.
Right.
And so it's not only what happens, it's not only how the two of you are
Uh-huh.
relate to money in
Right.
terms of your own finances and what money means to you.
Yeah.
You're having to confront your
Right.
in-laws, and you may be like, whoa, this is, now we're getting into new layers
Right.
of complexity. So again, it's just it does bring up some stuff.
Right. Right.
You know?
And I think, you know, I mean, I think there's a couple of things that that I would say here. One is that money is, you know, I mean, I think the last century was, the last millennium was really about sex and how hard sex is to talk about. We don't look at sex. We don't talk about sex. I feel like money is now the new sex in a lot of ways, in terms of we don't know how to talk about money. We
Yeah.
feel we get so squirrely around class. So I would say that like the first thing is that money's really hard to talk about.
Right.
Yeah, I would put it up there as, I'm going to put it, I can't really choose one hardest, but it is up there as the hardest
Yeah.
in a lot of ways. And then the second I would say is these things get very polarized when it comes to money. You know, well,
Yeah.
your family doesn't want to give anything. Or let's take another example, because we've used that one a few times, which is I earned a ton of money, you know, and you spent your 20s traveling.
Right.
And it can get very polarized.
Yeah.
And you can think, you know, like I married the wrong person, or I'm in the wrong
Right.
relationship, and this is what proves it. But I think that what you, with money in particular, what you will learn over time is that the other person who is in your life, this other person, what they have brings value. Their vantage point.
Yeah.
You know, the 20s spent traveling will teach you how to relax and travel down the road.
Right.
The 20s who spent their time, you know, squirreling away money.
Yeah.
You know, that person brought something that is going to, that, you know, in terms of the investment up front, and, you know, and they bring something too. So
Right.
don't let it get polarized around money. Try to stay open with it. It's a very hard thing to do.
I like that. I like that the adding value, that there's value add, even though it's not necessarily dollars on a spreadsheet
Right.
for a particular person,
Right.
you know, and that there's something there that's gonna, and you're essentially, you know, you're starting a business together.
Yeah.
When you're buying a house together,
Mm-hmm.
you're starting a business, and your home is your business. It is the asset. You have to maintain the asset.
Right.
The asset feeds you love and safety and security, and
Right.
you invest dollars and time into it.
Mm-hmm.
So that person, maybe they're not coming with a lot of money, but they're also coming with a lot of skill and experience and love and
Right.
perspective, and it's going to come back to you in kind of different ways.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And you live long enough, and the relationship lasts long enough, and, you know, things change. You know, you're the environment changes for your business, and all of a
Right.
sudden your partner's business
Right.
starts to boom.
Right, right.
And you all of a sudden found yourself in the exact opposite position that
Right.
you were saying was so terrible.
Yeah.
So take the long term.
Yeah,
Take
yeah.
the long big view on these things.
I like that.
It is, and again, a lot of what I'm going to be saying today are ways to stay flexible in hard conversations, things to keep in your back pocket when the temperature goes up, which inevitably, in doing something big, making a big step, that's just part of the deal. Temperature goes up. It gets scary. It gets
Right.
hard.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, just talking to you, I'm like, wow, that really is that actually is like, you know, coming to my mind as a bigger kind of thing than money in some ways, because there's so much of I am not them, or I am them,
Yeah.
or I want to be them, or and then why not, right?
Uh-huh.
And so
Yeah.
it's again another opportunity.
Right.
In many ways, but it most likely will come up. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
rarely would you just be like, we both want to be in downtown Oakland in a condo above the 7th floor.
Right.
You know.
Right.
Okay, cool. Let's go find that.
Right.
It's rarely going to go down like that.
Right. And if it goes that, then something else will need to be talked about.
Right.
I mean, you know, because like there's just a lot here in terms of, you know, we're different people. Other people are difficult. You know, I mean, the person who invented the kind of therapy that I do says, there's nothing more difficult in the world than another person. And so we really, and this is where kind of we get back to the contractual, stuff in terms of just, staying at the table, knowing, knowing any decision that you make needs to be both good for you and your partner.
Right.
That there's a lot of sort of those kind of good, how to keep relationship, a sense of equality, a sense of justice, and a sense of mutual care in our relationships.
Right. And one of the big things that I've had to learn growing up and maturing in a relationship is a differing point of view or a differing dream is not an attack on your dream or your point of view. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, which is, now I'm like, oh, that's so simple. Right. But when you're not secure enough, or you're not, grounded, or you haven't been through that process enough with your mate, and they're like, well, I like this, and I'm like, I like this, and it sounds to me like they're dissing me. It's really time to kind of bring the heat down.
If you can. Yeah. And these things, I mean, the heat is part of the deal too. But you brought up a good word that I think is really in here a lot, and what we're talking about which is identity. And any time that our identity is mixed up in something, this is who I am.
Yeah.
I am the kind of person who lives in this kind of neighborhood.
Right.
Or I am not the kind of person that lives in that neighborhood.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so anytime that you're talking about identity, and if you try to take someone's identity away from them, it is actually one of the most scary human experiences, which is you're taking away my sense of myself.
Yeah.
And that is, and you're bound for war.
Right.
If you try to take that away from somebody. A lot of this is staying out of the war brain and staying in the kind of more loving peace brain.
Yeah.
So if you're gonna, you say, well, it's really important to me to live in this neighborhood. Well, you better be able to say to your partner, you better be able to say why it would be good for your partner too, and why it adds value, and that you have your partner in mind, and that you understand their struggles with this particular thing.
Yeah.
If you're gonna go into those kind of conversations, you have to have your partner in mind.
So you've kind of gone through some of these processes. You've kind of laid down a pretty good foundation.
Yeah.
Now you're out kind of doing it, and we won't go too far into this, but another thing that comes up is taste. And I guess this is kind of related in many ways to what we've kind of spoken about, but taste is a funny thing, right? One's sense of what's beautiful,
Right.
and what's livable, and what one person can live in a fixer for 10 years and tweak at it, work on, have a project a year.
Yeah.
Another person, and maybe the same couple, wants a brand new house, right? Because they just don't want to handle that. Or taste, right? And decor, and what colors are nice, and what fabrics are nice, and all these things. And I it's been a process for my wife and I, because we came from kind of different spaces in that too. And so, what's kind of a fun, this is obviously not deal breaker territory.
Right.
So a funny just anecdote to
Yeah.
my wife and I call her kind of, her taste is kind of like bohemian or like boho chic, right? And it's a little messier, it's a little brighter, it's a little like,
have some tassels on
yeah,
it.
yeah. And she calls my taste sometimes museum-like.
That's great.
So it's like, because I
Right.
like things orderly, and and she's just like, it's a museum in here. And it's funny, but it's also like a real kind of moment that shows our differences. And I think, what, I don't know, is there anything that kind of comes to mind?
Yeah,
with
I
that?
mean, I think so. I mean, I'll just pick sort of different things to talk about, but I think for this one, I'll just talk about sort of family of origin, where we come from, because obviously taste is influenced by a long line of where we come from.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, taste comes from a long, long line of where we come from. And,
Yeah.
and you know, I mean, I don't know, you know, I'm making this up here, but, you know, for you, there might have been mess in the house. So you wanted more of a clean look, you know.
Yeah.
For Patty, it might have been, you know, more that she could never really express herself, you know, in fun ways around her house. I'm making
Sure.
all this
Right,
up.
right.
And this is finally her opportunity.
Yeah.
Now, that in itself, and as a statement, hey, Josh, you know, I'm being Patty now, I never got to really have fun in my environment. So it's really important
Yeah.
for me to have some, you know, to be able to have fun in the way we decorate our home. Your heart probably goes, oh, of course I want to give that to you.
Right.
And now it's different when, and this is where we really bring our family of origin with us. This is why it's important to know where your partner comes from. Why it's important to know about kind of their, you know, the sand traps in their golf course of their life.
Yeah.
You know, is because it can easily become, you're just like my dad. You never let me have any fun.
Right.
And so therefore I'm going to bring home that, you know, that boho chic couch and drop it right in the living room and say, you know, it's going here.
Right.
Because you never let me have what I want.
Right.
Now, of course, Patty's not going to do that, but the
At some point.
but the difference, if you know where the ghosts lie for your partner,
Yeah.
if you know where these spots are, and you're going to have real conversations about them,
Yeah.
then you can give each other what you want instead of fighting with ghosts of the past, which is so often what couples do. That's what we have to know. You know, people say, well, you know, therapy, what am I going to do? Talk about my mother, you know, and like
Yeah.
learn all that stuff. Well, yes, when especially in couples, there's nowhere clear because we bring that stuff, that baggage with us.
Yeah.
And unless we can name it, and unless our partner knows about it, then we are going to get caught in fighting about it. We're going to redo the same arguments that we had when we were kids, and we're not going to grow.
Yeah.
And so these are opportunities for growth.
Yeah.
That's why it's exciting.
Yeah. Another opportunity to learn,
Right.
you know,
Right.
about your mate and add to the differences or strengths.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's a big thing, right?
Differences are strengths. Yeah.
Differences
It's
or
nice.
strengths.
Yeah.
So, one thing that happens when couples are at the precipice of buying a house, there's usually a moment that I kind of call a freak out moment.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a kind of just a burst of anxiety and
Yeah.
fear and energy
Sure.
around
Sure. It's real.
it's real.
It's real.
Yeah.
And it might not even be real. It's funny. I remember, you know, when we bought our first home, this is 20 years ago, we drove to the house the night before. This is the first offer we put in. And of course we were naive. We thought you get the first offer that you put in on the house, which
Okay.
did not turn out to be true.
Right.
We drove out to the house and we sat there, you know, in front of the house and looked at it, and we started dreaming up, thinking about the house. And of course we got into a fight, you know, well, you know, and because we were anxious. And it felt like a lot of pressure. And it turns out this wasn't the right house. And you know why? Because we didn't get it. I don't know if it would have been the right house if we got it or not, but
Right.
we didn't end up getting it. And so it's just like, I remember what these moments are like.
Yeah.
And I know how pressure filled they are. And oftentimes there'll be a number of these pressure moments along the way.
Yeah. I mean, I have clients who have told me, like, sometimes it's about, you know, they're looking at me like, who are you? How can I have so much faith in you guiding me through this like, wait a minute.
Right.
Like, I don't know. Like,
Right.
And there's this,
Yeah.
like, can I trust you?
Sure. So
Moment
yes,
that
now we're
I
talking about the
catch.
realtor role.
Yeah,
You mean-
yeah.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
so it's like, so a lot of trust, and there's so many moving parts, and there's like this hurricane of stuff
Yeah.
that comes through. You know, how do you, when those big moments hit,
Yeah.
I'm sure there's fight or flight
Right.
that kicks in, and there's all kinds of, there's freeze.
Right.
Right.
Right. Okay.
I mean, I catch.
Yeah, I see where you're
I
going.
catch it a lot in different
Yeah.
forms.
Okay.
And what's kind of
Yeah.
what's kind of interesting about
Well,
that process to you?
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about two angles. One is the realtor angle. You know, this is why you get paid the big bucks. You know, because nobody really wants to watch a couple meltdown
Yeah.
or, get into a big fight and
how to navigate it, right?
and
'Cause it can be
yeah,
tricky.
and
Yeah.
I mean, there's a joke among therapists where it's like, God, this couple's in here, and I'm thinking, God, who's going to be the right therapist for this person? Because it's certainly not me.
Right.
I mean, because you get shook, you get scared, and a lot of it is just reminding yourself, you don't have to know everything, but
Yeah.
this is the role you're in. Take a deep breath, be in the role, let the role guide you, just in terms of you can just the fact that you're there, that you're holding a space, that you have been through this process a few times
Right.
or a number of times or 100 times,
Right.
and that you're learning from them, you're watching them, you're observing them, that
Right.
you can, to slow down yourself, slow down your breathing, take your time. And this is the role you're in, and nobody wants to be in it, but this is why you get paid. So
Right.
that's on the realtor side.
Yeah.
Now on the couple side, when you talk about fight flight, when you talk about freeze, you're starting to talk about the nervous system,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're talking about that when we get overstimulated or we get scared, or that we move from a state of being relaxed and rest and digest into fight and flight,
Mm-hmm.
fight, and hopefully, the when speaking to couples specifically here, is that I really like to think of couples being in each other's care. So, it really is your responsibility as a couple to help to regulate each other.
Yeah.
Which means, that as my nervous, all of a sudden, and you'll see this in couples, I start to get really animated when I get anxious. I'll start talking a lot, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And Jen will shut down a little bit,
Yeah.
and she'll withdraw.
Yeah.
So we have to know that about each other.
Right.
And I might look really good. I'm talking a lot. I'm moving. I'm blah, blah, blah. But if you know me well, you might know that underneath I'm really anxious.
Yeah.
And if Jen gets quiet, and you might think, wow, she's really she's really reserved, or you might have these ideas about it. But if you know your partner well,
Yeah.
Jen is my wife. If you know your partner well, to put a hand on their knee and say, hey, how you doing?
Right.
Check in.
Right.
You know some tricks of the trade
Yeah.
for how to help your partner to come back into the room.
Right.
Because really what you're trying to do in these tense situations is stay within a window that you can tolerate, listen, pay attention, be curious. And if anybody goes too high up in that window, out of the window, means that they're too activated, they're in fight. And if you drop too much out of the window, then you've frozen.
Right.
You've gone cold.
Yeah.
Right? Too hot, too cold.
Yeah.
And you want to stay in that. You want to have a nice kind of like a heartbeat. You want to have a woo woo, kind of an up
Right.
and down. And so your job as a couple is to regulate each other,
Mm-hmm.
to take a little time. Hey, we're getting a little stressed here. Can we take a quick walk around the block? And
Right.
and this is something that I want to remind couples about, which is nobody gets to get in the middle of you two, the two of you, the couple, right?
Yeah.
And no realtor, no therapist,
Yeah.
no parent, no child. You two are the bosses. You
Yeah.
are the generals. You
Yeah.
are the CEOs of this corporation,
Right.
of this union. And so it's your responsibility to look out for each other,
Right.
and it's your responsibility to protect each other from anything that's overstimulating or too scary. And so that's really so that we can stay in the game together and that we can make good decisions together. That's the reason why we keep each other on track, is because then we learn, then we get the most out of life. We become the best team. Two heads are better than one,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that's our job, is to stay in the room, stay regulated, make it through this shitstorm of a hard decision that we're making,
Yeah.
take care of each other in the process, know that that is the way that we're going to have the best outcome.
Right. And from my perspective, when I'm in that moment with somebody, is definitely backing up,
Mm-hmm.
right, and saying, you don't have to do anything. There's no like,
Sure.
we're not, I think realtors can be accused of being very pushy,
Mm-hmm.
which some are, and we
Mhm.
sometimes have to be, right, because there is sometimes a moment where you do kind of have to. But in that moment of freak out, it's really backing up. They are driving it.
Right.
We work for them. right?
Right,
They're
right.
making all the decisions,
Right.
and we're trying to lay out kind of repercussions. But yeah, that when it's really heightened, the last thing you want to do is really push.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and so it's just kind of sitting back and giving them the space, backing off completely. I'll
Right.
call you tomorrow, kind of a thing.
Right. Yeah.
And that tends to be most effective. But it is, you know, it's one of those rare circumstances in life where everything coalesces or converges
right.
at one moment. So it's like money, culture,
Sure.
dreams,
Sure. Yeah.
community.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and
Yeah.
we don't get a lot of those moments
Right,
where everything kind of comes in at once,
Yeah.
and then you're like 20
Yeah.
years,
Right.
You know,
right.
it's like, so it's kind of it's a fun moment, but it is a scary moment.
Right.
It
And
is a scary
yeah,
moment.
and if you can think about it as a real privilege, I mean,
Yeah,
you know, I mean that's what keeps me going in my work is that I'm you know, I believe that it's a love story at the end of the day, that we get, you know, that even though life is hard and we go through hard stuff, that I believe in the love story.
yeah,
And it's a privilege to be able to sit with people and try to help them work through really hard things and do
Yeah.
really hard things.
yeah. I love that. Thank you for
You're welcome, man. This is
talking
great.
to me.
This is great.
Super fun, and I really appreciate it. It was super insightful, and
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll keep
and,
talking for-
and good luck to the couples out there buying their home, and
Yeah.
and to the realtors, and yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
All right.
All right, my man.
So I hope you found my conversation with Jason useful and informative. There's a lot that goes into co-ownership, right? And this is, you know, dealing specifically with romantic partners, but it also should be kind of a way to also think about any kind of buying a property with any kind of partner, business partner, colleague, friend. Stuff comes up, and to anticipate it, get in front of it, talk about it, work it out, and it will make that investment together so much more successful. And so if you found this interesting and fun, please like and subscribe, and remember to buy, build, and manage with love, and the rest will work out.